Hello and welcome to the She Reads Romance Books podcast, the ultimate show for romance book lovers looking for the best books worth reading. I'm your host, Leslie Murphy, and in each short episode, I share my favorite book list of recommendations so you know exactly what to add to your must-read list. Join me as I explore the romance genre and have fun collecting book boyfriends along the way, because life is better with a love story. Hello. Welcome to the She Reads Romance Books podcast, where in today's episode, I am sharing my reading list for March 2025, giving you my mini book reviews of what I liked and what I didn't like, so that you can make a choice as to whether a book should go on your TBR list or if it's one that you might just want to skip. This month, I read a lot of recent releases and upcoming releases for this year that you will see soon, including several that made my list of most anticipated new romance books of 2025. So if you're curious what you should pre-order or not, this is the episode to listen to. This month, we went on vacation, and honestly, it was a true vacation, which meant no plans, but simply to relax and enjoy the beach and the pool, and I took full advantage of that. I read a lot of romance books with my Kindle Unlimited subscription, which always feels good to, add books into my Kindle Unlimited library. So if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription yourself, then listen up. Or if you're thinking about getting one, you can decide what you might want to put in your library after today's episode. As for the Romance Book Reading Challenge, which if you've been following me is my annual reading challenge where we read one romance book a month to explore the different categories of romance. March, our challenge was to read one romantic comedy, which several of the books I think on this list really qualify for that. For April, we are going to be reading one historical romance, which is really exciting. I would say a majority of the books that I read are contemporary, right? With some fantasy, paranormal thrown in. But man, do I love a good historical romance. So if you're up for the challenge this month, plan to read your own historical romance choice this month. And if you are on my newsletter list, then you will get some recommendations from me about what that book might be. Or I should say what I think you should read as your pick for this month for the reading challenge. And new this year, too, is my weekly romance book reading challenge if you want to sort of up the stakes. My weekly challenges focus on an additional reading challenge prompt, as well as a romance book trope for you to explore even more variety in the genre. I pull a card from my A Year of Reading Romance card deck each week for these weekly challenges. I share them only in my newsletter, so that's another reason to be sure to go to shereadsromancebooks.com/join to get on my list if you want to know what those weekly romance book reading challenges are. If you're more of the creative type and like to create your own challenge, then you can always purchase your own copy of my A Year of Reading Romance card deck for yourself. It includes 52 playing cards with a romance category or trope on one end of the card and a reading challenge on the other. So you can shuffle up this deck of cards, pull one out whenever you're just not really sure what you want to read next, or if you want, as I said, create your own reading challenge. It's just the perfect way to add in some fun into your reading life. Also, this month, I want to remind you that our April 2025 book of the month for the She Reads Romance Books book club is Story of My Life by Lucy Score. I talked about this book, I think, in my February 2025 reading recap episode, but all you need to know right now is that it's fantastic. A small town romance that Lucy is just so good at writing, and it's already a New York Times bestseller. I'm so looking forward to talking about this story in our book club meeting and talking with the one and only Lucy Score for this month's author Q&A meetup on Zoom, which is just so exciting that she will be joining us. If you want to join us in the club, then be sure to sign up at shereadsromancebooks.com/book club. Okay, now it is time to move on to my reading list for March, which started with Fan Service by Rosie Danan. I was so excited to jump into this fun rom-com because who am I to turn down a werewolf romance with a twist? Am I right? Right from the start, I was super engaged with the plotline of this book. A Hollywood has-been actor who played a werewolf on TV actually turns into a werewolf. I love it. Plus, he needs the help of the woman who ran his show's fandom website. Love it even more. So, this book started with a great hook when Devin and Alex first meet when she was a teenager. So, I mean, I'd say there's like a slight age gap to the story, but my heart really broke for her, but it gave such a good backstory to why she sort of holds herself back from people and the relationships in her life, and then how that would impact her reunion in the present with Devin. Devin, on the other hand, he in the present was this 42-year-old man-child, honestly, who never really seemed to grow up. My heart broke for him as well, given how he was raised by his parents, grew up sort of in Hollywood, and was always just looking to be loved and accepted. I wish his story arc had a bit more redemption to him, but he kept sort of fumbling over his interactions with Alex and would say the stupidest and sometimes hurtful things in his naivete. So it was kind of hard for me to really fall for the guy. But I would say the whole, he turns into a werewolf now, what's he going to do storyline was really fun, including how Rosie sort of weaved in aspects from his show to help him learn how to rein in his inner wolf, if you will. So, and I think anyone sort of obsessed with the show's fandom will kind of enjoy that aspect to this book. I'd say, too, if the paranormal aspect of the book is sort of holding you back, I wouldn't sweat it. It felt like a book more that read like a contemporary rom-com than anything. So overall, I really liked Alex, tolerated Devin, and thought it was a fun read, but found the ending a bit disappointing. So it wasn't really my favorite, but I'm glad I read it. But I will say the cover for this book, it's just stunning. Perfect. Whoever the artist is, they totally knocked it out of the park. I think it's fantastic. Okay, next up for my March reading list was May Luna by Kelly McNeil. I actually picked this book up from my local library because my local independent bookstore was reading this for their romance book club in March, and the author is actually going to make a visit. So I was like, I want to see if it was worth me attending the event. I was super intrigued by the storyline and some good reviews that I'd read, so I dove in. It is about a rock star whose band took off in the 1990s, totally my era, but a reporter ends up unearthing the story about the rock star's connection to this woman whose love sort of changed his and all of his band members' lives. So then you meet Evie, sort of in the present, whose two grown children discover an iconic photo in this old magazine of a mystery girl with Carter, the rock star, that turns out to actually be their mother. So it kicks off this story that goes back and forth from the present to the past, with both Carter and Evie sharing the story of their ultimate love story. But okay, I'm going to give a huge spoiler to this book, so just skip ahead if you think you want to read this book or if you love rockstar romances. I would recommend this book if you love a heart-wrenching story. But, and this is a huge but, this is not a romance book. And so let me repeat, it is not a romance. Why? Because there is no happy ending, right? And that is what makes a romance book. So why this was a pick for the Romance Book Club, I have no freaking idea. I won't give more spoilers than that, but I can't tell you how many times I was reading the last few chapters of this book while on vacation and just shouting out like, I cannot believe this book. I was so pissed. I was not a happy camper. Plus, I should say there's another huge reason why I didn't like where this book ended up going, and because it has a certain romance trope that I cannot stand. So this is going to be another spoiler, so fast forward if you don't want to hear it. But it has the she didn't tell him she's pregnant trope. And I so hate that trope so much. So once I got to that point, I was just like, I'm out. I finished the book. I skimmed it. And then when I knew there was no happily ever after, I was just, again, pissed. So, yes, I think this book is well written, but the story was completely ruined for me. The ending, not a romance. So, if that really bothers you, totally skip this one. Sorry, not sorry. So from there, I dived into my Kindle Unlimited subscription and took full advantage while on vacation, starting with Wild Eyes by Elsie Silver, which is book 2 in her Rose Hill series. I absolutely adored this book. So it came at like the perfect time when I was still raging from that last read. And I think honestly, it's my favorite of this series. Absolutely a 5-star book, one of the best. It is a single dad country singer down on her luck small town romance that I devoured in one sitting. It starts off with such a great meet cute. I don't know why I'm obsessed with meet cutes, but if an author does it really well, I just think it sets the book off on such a good foot. But in their meet cute, Weston, the hero of the story, rescues Skylar from a potential like bear mauling on the side of the country road. It's actually kind of hysterical. But the banter between them right from the start with that encounter was just like the best and continued throughout the book, where Skylar ends up staying in this very remote cabin on Weston's property, falling for him and his 2 kids while she hides out from her country career and ends up recording her own album with Weston's best friend's help. And you meet his best friend in book 1 of the series. So I loved Skylar's growth in this book, loved her connection to Weston's kids, loved Weston as a father, and yet also as this really fun, hilarious guy. I honestly loved everything about it and definitely loved it better than book 1 of the series. So, of course, after finishing it, I had to dive into book 3, which just recently released, because I was already hooked on Tabby and Reese's story. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Rhys? I don't know. Because we learn a little bit about them from Wild Love and Wild Eyes. And so Wild Side turned out to be fantastic as well. Another 5-star read and really rivaled Wild Eyes as my favorite of the series. So Wild Side, as I said, is Tabby and Reese's story. Tabby is the owner of the restaurant in town who is, kind of burning the candle at both ends because she's head chef of her place, but now she's also juggling the caretaking of her little nephew, Milo, who I think is 3, if I'm remembering correctly. I can't remember. But he is the son of her sister who recently died due to an overdose. However, there is this hitch because her sister left Reese, who was her landlord, as the guardian of Milo in her will. And so now Reese is in town to assess Tabby and to assess Milo's grandparents, or to possibly just take Milo from her. And Tabby is just like not having it. She's so pissed, right? And pretty much makes an enemy out of Reese. But Reese, oh my gosh, this man has a heart of gold, patience like no other. He sees that she's hurting, right, and grieving, and actually turns his life, upside down to care for Milo, but also to let him stay with Tabby, even if it means entering a marriage of convenience with Tabby so that he can travel to where she lives and stay in Canada since he is American and lives in the United States. So he has to leave and go back to the States for weeks at a time for his job, though he keeps what his job is a secret, which is, wait for it, he is a professional wrestler. Oh my gosh, I loved the aspect of this storyline because I guess Elsie and her son love to watch WWE on TV. So she pulled from that love and put it into this book. But even if you conjure up the worst picture of, WWE in your mind, if that's not your thing, it's really not like the over the top WWE, and it's not really an overwhelming part of the story. So don't let that hold you back at all. I adored Reese. Gosh, his love for Milo was amazing and the sweetest, and his love for Tabby, his tragic backstory, which only made me want him to get his happily ever after so, so badly. He was just so selfless and good. So such a good book boyfriend. I highly recommend this one. All right, next up on my Kindle Unlimited binge reading was the new release from Nikki Sloan in her Nashville Neighborhood series, which are all sort of taboo romances. And this one is called The Broker. And this book right here is another example of why I love reading and having a Kindle Unlimited subscription, because you can check out a book, especially if you think, oh, maybe the summary sounds good. And if you don't love it, then sort of no harm, no foul, right? Now, this one was a miss for me because I just didn't think the writing was there. And I really just didn't care for the characters, like at all. Charlotte is the heroine. So she gets caught up with a boyfriend who's not really good for her and ends up quitting college, moving in with him to her parents' dismay and getting caught off by them. Well, that sort of implodes that relationship. So she tucks tail and moves home, and her dad makes her clean his office after hours as a job, and which she then eventually turns into this cleaning company of her own. Meanwhile, she has this one night stand hookup who turns out to be Noah, who just started working for her dad. So you get this age gap boss's daughter romance, but honestly, neither of those aspects were really what was the focus of the story, even though that's sort of what the book summary leads you to believe. The taboo aspect, I think, was more front and center, which I thought was actually pretty cool and different from the other books in the series, which was this whole idea and kink around sharing. So Noah is what's considered, I guess, a bull, basically a guy who gets it on with other women while their partner either watches or at least knows about the hookups. I didn't know that was a thing, but anyway, so he gets involved with this couple, and then Charlotte and Noah start dating in secret and then try sharing themselves. So things do get kind of hot, yet that sort of piece of the story really just couldn't carry the book in my mind. So overall, I'd say if the taboo aspect appeals, then definitely check it out. But this book was kind of a miss for me. Next up on my March reading list, I finally finished The Dixon Rule by Elle Kennedy. I had been listening to it as an audiobook, like to and from work and so forth, but the books in this series are so long, you guys. So it was taking me a really long time to get through this book as an audiobook. So I ended up finishing it by reading it in Kindle Unlimited. And I'd say this one is my favorite so far in her Campus Diaries series. It's an enemies to lovers, forced proximity, new adult romance that actually hits on a pretty significant social issue as well in the story. Diana, I don't want to keep calling her Dana. Diana Dixon is a cheerleader at the university who also loves like ballroom dancing. She has recently broken up with her boyfriend, and she's not happy with Shane, one of the hockey studs that sort of in her friend group, who has just moved into her apartment building across the hall. She cannot stand Shane because he has hooked up with a bunch of her squad mates. So Diana just thinks he's just this big playboy when really he had broken up with his high school sweetheart who he thought he'd marry. So he's still a bit shaken up from that breakup, because he's actually really a relationship guy. But their forced proximity gives Diana the chance to make him her fake boyfriend to keep her ex out of her hair. And that slowly opens the door for, real feelings to surface. So while this book is long, I really liked the back and forth banter between Diana and Shane. They were just really fun together. And as I mentioned, this also deals with an important social issue, which is domestic violence. So trigger warnings should be read for this one. I think Elle did a really, really great job presenting Diana's ex, who, is someone who looks like he's a good package. He looks good on the outside, seemed like he's good on the inside, had this academic prowess and etc., but who is really a narcissist and turned out to be an abuser. It was kind of startling, honestly, to see what happens between them. And I think Diana's inner dialogue about what ends up happening and how she initially deals with it is so common among women. And also just then his way of apologizing and yet blaming. And it was just so toxic. But I think how narcissists manipulate their words and turn things on their victims. Elle did such a great job in how she portrayed this situation. So if you like new adult romances with hockey studs and feisty heroines, then I really think you would like The Dixon Rule. So, of course, after reading The Dixon Rule, I immediately dove into the third book of the series, The Charlie Method, because it was one of my most anticipated new romance books of the year, given the book summary, which had me so intrigued, as it's about Charlie, who thinks she's a junior, but by the end I felt like they made her seem like she was a senior, but she's in college, and she's kind of leading this double life where she sort of presents this good girl image with her sorority, sort of on the outside, but she's also someone who just really loves sex and hooking up. And she starts messaging these two guys on this app who share an account because they like to share between each other. And she's sort of intrigued by this, right? And those two guys happen to be teammates on the school hockey team and best friends, Beckett Dune and Will Larson. Now, the book summary makes it sound like the main part of the story, besides them having this, three-way hookup situation, is that Will's dad, who happens to be a senator, is then going to send this reporter to write a story on Will and his hockey team. So I thought his lifestyle would be like outed from that, but really that story was just kind of background and honestly sort of an annoying part of the side part to the story. Really, this book was about them getting it on, obviously, and having threesomes, but also about Charlie, who turns out to be adopted, and how she sets out to find her birth, parents, and sort of what ensues from that, which I won't give spoilers. While I had, I'd say, very high hopes for this book, I didn't really enjoy it. Sure, the threesome idea was kind of hot to begin with, but I thought Charlie was annoying, and the story about her adoption and sort of Will's story just sort of fell flat for me. I didn't even really buy how the book ended, to be quite honest. And maybe that's because, again, these books are just really, really long. And maybe that's why they're in Kindle Unlimited, because you probably get paid by how many pages people read. But I didn't think it needed to be that long. And it just didn't really deliver what I thought it would. So I'll leave it up to you to decide whether you should read it or not. I'm glad I read it through Kindle Unlimited, but definitely not a favorite. Okay, so after that, I started reading an upcoming release that also made my list of most anticipated new romance books. And it might honestly have been my most anticipated of the year. And that book is Left of Forever by Tara DeWitt. I read it a little bit early because I just spoke with Tara about this book for an upcoming episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast, which was amazing. It was so cool to meet her and chat with her. So stay tuned for that episode to drop. I believe May 19th, which is release week for Left of Forever. I was desperate for this book ever since reading last year's hit, Savor It, which I know I've talked about a lot on this podcast because I just loved it so much. And because I feel so hard for Wren and Ellis, who are the characters in Left of Forever, in just their few cameos that they had in that book. I just needed to know more about what drove these two apparent soulmates apart and if they would be able to find their way back to each other. So what transpires is this really beautiful second chance romance that I think a lot of people may be able to relate to. And I think that's honestly the beauty of DeWitt's romances that I'm coming to find, having read now 3 or 4 under my belt. She creates these perfectly imperfect characters who are so relatable in the struggles they find themselves in and the way they navigate, given their heart and their love to another in the process of sort of moving through those struggles. I told her, I'm convinced that this is your superpower as an author. And Wren and Ellis, honestly, are no different. She crafted these two people who found each other as kids and who grew to become friends, then lovers, and then parents at such a young age, who then let the bad times sort of overshadow the good until they just called it quits. Now their grown son, he's off to college, and so they drop him off and then agree to take a road trip home together to see if what they once had is still there and salvageable. So I will say that the story doesn't jump right into the road trip that's mentioned in the summary. This might make the story seem like it has a slow start to some, but I think it was actually pretty genius and helps those who haven't read savor it. Instead, Tara gives like a bit of background and understanding to where Ren and Ellis are in their respective headspaces, both finally letting themselves realize how much they miss, their other half and how they might be ready to fight for each other when, they maybe weren't before, having now been divorced for 5 years. From there, the forced proximity of their road trip home, again, after dropping off their son Sam at college, is sort of this mixture of reminiscing and dealing with the moments and feelings that drove them to divorce, as well as them dropping their guards to admit that the love that they still have for each other and hope to resurrect again. There were just so many like one-liners, I'll say, that really stuck out with me while reading it that illustrate how tough it can be in any relationship and in any marriage, even if you are soulmates. I loved how these two allowed themselves to fight for the love that never left them and how much joy it brought to all of those around them as well. So, highly recommend this and savor it if you love a fulfilling romance with like all the feels. Another new romance that I just read that won't drop actually until the end of July is Give Me a Reason by J.C. Lee. This is the first book I read by J.C. When I saw that she was releasing a modern retelling of Jane Austen's Persuasion in the year that we are celebrating 250 years since Jane's birth, which is obviously this year, 2025, I was all over it. Plus, with the added bonus of her writing Anne, the heroine, as an actress who starred in K-dramas for years. It's like the diverse read I've been waiting for. I will admit, though, to start, that I have never read Persuasion before, but I did, or I have watched the latest film adaptation starring Dakota Johnson. So I kind of had that film in the back of my mind and its key plot points in my head the entire time I was reading this. And I would say that it like hit all the marks, right, that stand out to me from this classic story. So you're instantly thrust into the moment when Frederick and Anne once again come face to face with each other after 10 years apart, after a brutal breakup that neither has been able to forget. Instead of them, meeting in an English countryside, however, they come face to face in an elementary school classroom where Frederick is going to talk about his career as a firefighter and Anne as an actress in K-dramas in Korea. From that very first moment, then, JC does this amazing job of, denoting their tortured pining, right? And the hurt and devastation of Anne cutting off their relationship all those years ago. So don't expect like this subtle buildup or a lot of background at the beginning, just as you don't really in the movie, right? So you're immediately swept into their tortured reunion and forced proximity in the coming months because his friend and coworker is set to marry Anne's cousin. So they have a lot of run-ins given that situation. So I would say overall, if you are a fan of the film adaptations, then I think you will adore this book and love the modern twist that JC gives this popular story. If you're completely brand new to Persuasion, you might wish that there was more background at first, but it's just not how I saw this playing out, I guess, given the original story. But the letters from Frederick to Anne that he wrote in the past that are kind of sprinkled throughout the book, however, do a really great job, I think, of bridging this gap to show just how enamored, really, and devoted he was to her from the beginning, and helps to explain why he would still be so in love with her after all this time. And for me, at least, when reading a modern retelling, I'm looking for the story, right, to hit all the highlights of the classic, which I think this one did, right? You got the ignorant father and spoiled older sister that Anne sacrifices for, the miscommunication that Frederick might be falling for someone else right in front of her eyes, or Anne's, minor injury and Frederick coming to the rescue, and many other moments that sort of stand out as iconic to Persuasion to me. So, their pining does get a bit repetitive, and it was hard to keep all these like secondary characters straight. But overall, I think it was a really fun and wonderful retelling. Plus, it's another one that has a really beautiful, beautiful cover, one of the best of this year. Okay, after that retelling, I dove back into Kindle Unlimited for just this, a spicy read and chose Caleb by Nicole Edwards, which is book 1 in her Alluring Indulgence series, which has 8 total books, actually. This is a friends to lovers romance about Caleb, who is one of 7 brothers and who has been friends with Zoe, the girl next door, since like middle school. And while they've always been friends, both secretly pine for each other and hope that they can be more. But it takes when Caleb's family offers to buy land from Zoe's family to start their exclusive resort, aka sex club, to then help her family from foreclosure. It's sort of the bump each of them need to like begin hooking up and seeing, come what may. Overall, such a fun, quick read that is, I think, the perfect launching ground for this series. I'm definitely intrigued about all of the brothers and want to continue the series to hear their stories. But I'm coming to find, right, that having read a few books in Nicole's Club Destiny series, of which there is actually a crossover in this book, so this makes sense, that she loves to write books with menage scenes and sharing. Like, I think that is her catnip, gosh, with these 2 series. So, and I'm thinking that this book now is pushing me to create, and maybe the Charlie Method too, even though I don't enjoy that one as much, is pushing me to create a book list about romances with sharing in them. So, yeah, I think that might be coming soon, actually. I'm going to have to do that. So not only do Caleb and Zoe start hooking up, right, and finally start admitting their feelings, Caleb's friend gets in on the action. So if that's not your thing, you might want to skip this one. But if you like a bit of forbidden or taboo and want something spicy, then give it a read. Okay, next up, I think this is my last of the month, is a book that I am sort of a bit obsessed with at the moment, not going to lie, and one that has made my list of best romance books of 2025 already, and that is Any Trope But You by Victoria Levine, which is her debut novel. One of my first thoughts, honestly, after reading it, and probably heck, even during reading it, I'm thinking, I have just found a new favorite author. I mean, this is her first book, but already, like, she's a favorite. I need more. And I think there's something really special when you start a new romance, especially a debut novel that hooks you from the very first chapter and only gets better and better. I am honestly blown away by Victoria's amazing writing in Any Trope But You, which is a romance, I think, that gives such love to all the popular romance tropes that us romance fanatics really devour. So how did I come to this book? So after just reading the summary, this book made my list of top 10 most anticipated new romance books releases for April 2025. So if you check out that list on shereadsromancebooks.com, you will see it. I loved that it is about a popular romance author who has lost her faith in love, if she ever really had it, honestly, and who secretly plots happily never afters for all of the main characters in her books. And this list of happily never afters gets like outed, and so she immediately becomes shunned by her readers online and on social. She gets dropped by her publisher. And so then she gets shipped off to this remote lodge in Alaska by her sister to help her find her muse as a new thriller or mystery writer. And of course, there she meets this hunk of a man who just may turn her thoughts on love on its head. So who wouldn't want to read that book, right? So normally I don't dive into, a debut novel right away, but oh my gosh, I'm so glad you did. Or I did. My first impressions of the book, honestly, was like, there's no way that this is a debut novel because the writing was phenomenal. Her prose was perfection, creating characters who just seemed to jump off the page and moving a storyline along that just really hooked you from the start. Like I said, they had this really adorable meet cute, and just sort of the events that continue the story along were just really, really great. So yes, I'm going to be reading whatever this woman writes next, honestly. Forrest and Margot are the main characters. I loved their commonality as caretakers to family members they loved and how that connection really helped them to understand and truly see the other. And Forrest, gosh, he is my new favorite book boyfriend. Of course, the man is not only this like hot lumberjack, right, chopping wood that when she first sees him, but he's extremely intelligent, like top in his field of cancer research. He can cook like amazing meals. He has a heart of gold. And like I said, he's just such a good caretaker of everyone in his life. But then Margot, the heroine, gosh, my heart bled for her when her professional life just implodes. But it was also like the personal setbacks that you come to learn about that really hit home as well for that character. And I love that she would do anything for her sister, but that her sister in turn sort of really helps her to grow throughout this book. And I should say, as a romance book lover, as I alluded to at the very beginning, I adored how Victoria paid homage to so many romance book tropes in the story without like force feeding them or making the story hokey, if that kind of makes sense. You get little enemies to lovers. You get some forced proximity to Margot mocking the only one bed, only one tent trope, and so much more. I think I'm going to have to like play a game where I want everybody to identify all the tropes that are woven into this book so seamlessly. I think that would be a lot of fun. So as you can tell, I loved this book. Cannot recommend it enough. It released April 1st, so be sure and snag yourself a copy. You won't regret it. And I think that's the perfect way to end this episode, right? On such a high with a really great book. I do hope that this episode gave you some food for thought with books you may or may not want to add to your TBR list. And if I did, then I'd love for you to let me know with either a review on your favorite podcast platform, or you can head over to my private Facebook group, the She Reads Romance Book Reader Lounge, and let me know in there. Also, I don't really ask this a lot, but if you know someone who's contemplating reading some of these books or who you think would love to hear about them, then definitely share this episode with them so that they can learn more and build up their TBR list as well. One last reminder before I go that we are reading Story of My Life by Lucy Score in book club this month. So I will see you in the club for that. And be sure to pick out a historical romance book this April if you want to tackle the romance book reading challenge this month. It's really going to be a lot of fun. So thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, until next time, happy reading, because life is better with a love story. That's all for this episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some new books to add to your TBR list. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really helps me reach more romance book lovers like you, and I appreciate your support. If you're a book boyfriend collector like me, then you'll want to join my email list so you never miss a podcast episode or a new book list. Just visit shereadsromancebooks.com/join and sign up today. As a thank you, I'll instantly send you my list of top 10 book boyfriends that will make you swoon. Trust me, you don't want to miss this list. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy reading.